Do you remember Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and ever wonder about the strangest things no one talks about? Those little stop-motion figures lit up every 60s living room, carrying the warmth and wonder of Christmas for a whole generation. But behind that glow, what ODD truths were quietly left out? It is strange to think that the beloved puppets from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer were made from real animal fur and human hair. Every single puppet was hand-stitched, glued, and wired to move frame by frame, giving it that lifelike shimmer that both fascinated and unsettled people. The fur would stick under the hot lights, and animators had to gently brush and reshape it between takes. Some even say that during long shoots, the reindeers' faces would warp slightly, so by the time the episode was done, their expressions were never exactly the same again. It gave the world that charming yet oddly haunting quality we still notice when watching it today. Back in the 1960s, that craftsmanship was ahead of its time. But there is no denying how eerie those tiny glassy eyes could feel under flickering lights. The more you look at them, the more alive they seem. And maybe that is what made it unforgettable. Rudolph's glowing red nose was not an effect added later. It was an actual light bulb wired into the tiny puppet's head, powered by a miniature battery pack that often overheated. During long sessions, animators had to stop to cool it down or replace the bulb entirely. Sometimes the light would flicker, creating a strange heartbeat-like pulse that looked almost too human. It's hard not to feel a little uneasy when you realize every frame of Rudolph's glow was a delicate balancing act between heat, light, and patience. The glow was meant to be a symbol of innocence and hope, yet behind the scenes, it took engineering closer to a science experiment than a Christmas story. That tiny bulb became one of the most iconic images in television history, a real light shining through the darkness of handmade magic. If you rewatch the special today, you might notice something surprising. Santa is not exactly jolly. He snaps at his elves, ignores Rudolph, and barely smiles through most of the story. It feels out of step with the cheerful holiday spirit, but it reflected something real about the time. In the 1960s, America was under pressure. War, cultural shifts, and a longing for structure shaped even the way heroes were written. Santa became less a magical figure and more a strict father who expected everyone to behave perfectly. The children watching did not question it back then. That was just the way adults seemed to be. Looking back now, his coldness gives the story an unexpected edge, a reminder that even in holiday cheer, the world outside was not always kind. Maybe that tension is what made Rudolph's courage shine even brighter. There was once a version of Rudolph's ending that no one saw for years. The original broadcast did not show the island of misfit toys being rescued, leaving kids across America confused and a little heartbroken. Letters poured into the network asking why the toys were forgotten. It took almost a decade before producers quietly reanimated the missing scene and added it back into future airings. That moment of redemption became one of the most emotional parts of the entire special, but few people know it was never there to begin with. The idea that something so hopeful had to be restored later adds a strange kind of poetry to the story. Even Rudolph's world needed a second chance, just like the toys themselves. Years after the special aired, the original puppets vanished. For decades, no one knew where they had gone, until a television historian found them decaying in a basement in the early 2000s. Their fur had fallen off, their wires were rusted, and their faces were frozen mid-expression, half smiling, half gone. It was both a discovery and a heartbreak. These were the same tiny figures that once brought millions of families together every Christmas Eve. Seeing them lifeless made people realize how fragile the magic really was. They were cleaned, restored, and placed in display cases, but you can still see the wear of time on them. Those cracks tell the real story, the one that never aired on television. Hermey the elf was different, and not just because he wanted to be a dentist. In an era when most television characters fit neatly into expectations, Hermey's quiet voice and gentle manner stood out. To 1960s audiences, that difference felt strange, too soft, too odd, but it also struck a chord with anyone who had ever felt out of place. Modern viewers often see Hermey's story as queer-coded, a reflection of someone longing to be accepted for who they are when the world will not listen. The writers never said that outright, but the feeling is there in every line he speaks, every glance he gives toward the life he wants instead of the one he is told to live. Back then, this was a brave kind of storytelling hidden under candy-colored animation. Hermey's courage was quiet, but it gave voice to millions who had none at all. Few people realize that most of Rudolph's animation was not made in America. Rankin and Bass, the producers, sent the entire project overseas to a Japanese studio where craftsmen hand-moved every puppet frame by frame. The team worked long hours, often sleeping in the same studio where the snow was painted on sets made of cotton and glitter. These artists never received on-screen credit, yet their precision and patience built the world that millions now cherish. It is haunting to think how much of this American classic came from anonymous hands half a world away. For many of those animators, this was their first exposure to American culture, and they poured their curiosity and admiration into every snowflake. When you look at those shimmering stop-motion landscapes, you are seeing a small bridge between two worlds, one built out of art, effort, and shared wonder. Behind the heartwarming story was a shrewd bit of marketing. A major toy company helped fund the production and pushed for script changes to feature more toy appeal. Suddenly there were more reindeer, more elves, and an entire island of misfit playthings designed to connect with holiday shoppers. The story that once celebrated being different also became a tool to sell that message in the form of collectibles and plush dolls. It was not uncommon in the 1960s, but Rudolph's case stands out because it worked. Children begged for the toys, and parents obliged, thinking they were sharing a little joy. Yet beneath the glitter of the merchandise was the reality of an industry that had learned how to package emotion. The line between magic and marketing blurred, leaving behind a bittersweet lesson about how childhood memories can be manufactured one toy at a time. The voice behind Rudolph came from a young actress named Billie Mae Richards, whose performance gave the character his innocent spark. But when the special became a hit, her name was nowhere to be found. She was replaced in credits and rarely invited to any anniversary retrospectives. It was an all-too-common story in early television, especially for women who were often cast aside once the job was done. For years, fans thought the voice belonged to a young boy, not realizing it was a woman's delicate tone carrying the heart of the story. When she was finally recognized decades later, her response was humble and gracious, much like Rudolph himself. She said she only ever wanted people to feel joy when they heard her voice. That quiet dignity makes her one of the unsung heroes behind the magic, and perhaps the most fitting reflection of Rudolph's spirit. If you look closely at some scenes, you might notice certain reindeer never blink. Their eyes stiff and unresponsive, seem locked in a perpetual stare. It was not intentional. Some of the mechanical eye joints jammed during production, and animators could not afford to fix them mid-shoot. The result was unsettling, but no one mentioned it until years later when audiences noticed how haunting it felt. Those frozen gazes became an accidental symbol of the show's eerie stillness, a mix of warmth and something ghostly just beneath the surface. In a way, it mirrors the entire era, handmade beauty created under pressure, fragile and imperfect. The reindeer looked alive, but just barely, and maybe that is what makes them timeless. Every frame was built with exhaustion, love, and a bit of unintentional strangeness, and that is exactly why we cannot look away. The snowman narrator, Sam, was supposed to bring warmth to the story, but behind the scenes he was slowly melting under the studio lights. His body was made of wax and plastic foam, and the heat from the stop-motion lamp softened him to the point where animators had to rebuild parts of him daily. One day he would look plump and cheery, and the next, his face would sag just slightly. Those tiny inconsistencies slipped into the final cut, giving him that strange, shifting charm. Burl Ives, the legendary singer who voiced him, never knew how fragile his counterpart truly was. The irony is that a character meant to embody winter could not survive the warmth of the studio. It is poetic in a way, a snowman narrating a story that nearly melted him out of existence. Before the networks approved the script, Rudolph's story contained a quiet nod to faith, a brief moment linking his light to a miracle, a reminder of Christmas's original roots. But that reference was quietly removed before airing, replaced with more neutral, family-friendly themes. Television executives wanted a holiday story that sold toys, not one that touched too closely on religion. It is strange to imagine how that small omission shaped decades of holiday television, where faith was softened into sentiment. Maybe that is why Rudolph feels spiritual even without saying it. His glow stands for belief itself, a symbol too universal to censor. Sometimes what gets erased tells us more about the world than what remains. The island of misfit toys has always felt like a dream, but some say it carried a political message. In a time when conformity ruled everything from schools to suburb design, the idea of misfits being cast away spoke directly to people living through the Cold War. Everyone was expected to fit the mold, same jobs, same houses, same smiles, and those who didn't were quietly pushed aside. The island, with its lonely cast of forgotten playthings, mirrored that quiet alienation. Watching it now, it feels less like fantasy and more like social commentary wrapped in tinsel. The special might never have meant to say all that, but it captured something America was feeling: the fear of standing out and the longing to belong somewhere anyway. In that sense, Rudolph's Flight Home is not just about Christmas, it is about acceptance. Few fans know that there was once a half-finished sequel to Rudolph. Rankin and Bass began production in the early 1970s, planning to continue the reindeer's adventures with new stop-motion sets and songs. But as budgets tightened and television trends changed, the project was quietly shelved and eventually abandoned. A few storyboards survived, showing Rudolph as a slightly older reindeer navigating a darker, more mature world. It is fascinating to imagine how that version might have shaped the holiday legacy we know today. Instead, the story stopped exactly where it needed to, on a note of innocence that never aged. Maybe it is better that way, frozen in its perfect moment before time could tamper with it. For years, the original puppets were thought to be lost forever, until a collector stumbled upon them in an attic wrapped in tissue and dust. Rudolph's fur had stiffened into wire, his once bright nose cracked and faded. The snowman's smile had warped, giving him an eerie, ghost-like grin. Restorers took months to repair them, replacing wires and patching fabric, trying to preserve every bit of that 1960s charm. Today, they sit behind glass in temperature-controlled cases, still carrying the faint marks of time. Seeing them up close, it is impossible not to feel a strange mix of wonder and sadness. They survive decades just to remind us how fragile memory can be, and how something handmade can outlive the hands that made it. Johnny Marks, the man behind Rudolph's music, was already famous for writing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but even he struggled to get his songs into the television special. The producers wanted something new, something they could call their own. Marks refused to let his work be replaced, fighting through weeks of negotiations just to protect the melody that had become part of American Christmas. In the end, he won, and his music stitched the story together with that familiar glow of nostalgia. It's easy to forget that every note was written during long nights of self-doubt, wondering whether his song still mattered to a changing world. Yet, when that first line played, "You know Dasher and Dancer," the magic returned instantly. The music was more than just background sound, it was memory itself. In the earliest animation tests, Rudolph's nose did not glow softly, it throbbed. The light flickered irregularly, pulsing like a heartbeat against the dark set. Some crew members found it unsettling, almost too human for a children's story. They adjusted the wiring and filters until the glow softened into the gentle red shimmer we all recognize. But those first test reels still exist, and people who have seen them say it changes everything. The nose no longer feels like a symbol of hope. It looks like a burden, a living thing that will not stop beating. It is strange how one small detail can alter an entire story's mood. The Rudolph we know today might have been a little too haunting for its own good if that heartbeat had stayed. During production, time ran out before the holidays and animators worked through Christmas Eve just to meet the deadline. They slept on the studio floor, living on black coffee and instant noodles while the snow sets were still drying. Some of them had not seen their families for weeks. When the last frame was finally shot, the crew gathered around the projector and watched the finished special together in silence. For a brief moment, the room filled with relief and pride instead of exhaustion. It was a strange kind of Christmas. No gifts, no feast, just the quiet satisfaction of creating something that would live on. Every flicker of light in that film carries a trace of those sleepless nights. That is what makes it feel so human. By the mid-1970s, certain scenes vanished from the broadcast entirely. Some networks decided they were too slow or too un-Christian, trimming away moments that made the special feel strange or melancholy. Viewers never knew. Whole sequences were simply gone, replaced with commercial breaks and tighter edits. It changed the pacing, softened the mood, and erased some of the story's quiet sadness. For years, children watched a version that was brighter, shorter, and more cheerful, unaware that something had been lost. When uncut versions resurfaced decades later, the difference was startling. The real Rudolph had always been a little darker, a little lonelier, and maybe that is what made it timeless. When it first aired in 1964, no one could have guessed how deeply Rudolph would shape American Christmas television. Its imperfect puppets, its quiet message about difference, and its homespun warmth became a blueprint for every holiday special that followed. Without it, there would be no Frosty, no Santa Claus is Coming to Town, no nostalgic reruns that marked December nights. It turned handmade animation into a cultural ritual. Something families shared year after year like an heirloom. Even now, when the world is louder and faster, Rudolph's gentle pace feels like a gift from another time. It reminds us that imperfection can be beautiful, and that the smallest light can guide us home. If these hidden stories made you see Rudolph's world a little differently, share your thoughts below, tap like to keep its glow alive, and subscribe so we can uncover more forgotten Christmas magic together.